Before we start, if you're enjoying this type of content, don't forget to leave a like. That helps the channel so much. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next videos. The autumn of 1908 had painted New England in shades of amber and crimson. In a modest house on the outskirts of Providence, Rhode Island, a photographer named Samuel Mitchell prepared his studio for what would become one of the most discussed portraits of the era. The woman who entered that day was Margaret Thornton, 34 years old, her face marked by the quiet dignity of someone who had endured hardship with grace. In her arms rested her infant son Thomas, barely 3 months old, a child born after years of longing and loss. Samuel Mitchell was known throughout Providence for his meticulous attention to detail. His portraits weren't merely images, they were carefully composed narratives, each element deliberate and meaningful. The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of his studio, casting soft, diffused shadows that seemed to caress the subjects rather than expose them harshly. Margaret held Thomas with the protective tenderness only a mother could possess. Her expression was serene, almost peaceful, a striking contrast to the turmoil that had characterized her life. The boy slept, his tiny features relaxed in that innocent unconsciousness unique to infants. Samuel adjusted the positioning of his subjects, moving around them with practiced precision, ensuring the composition would capture not just their physical forms, but the emotional resonance of the moment. The photograph was taken using the photographic plates of the period, a slow process requiring absolute stillness from the subjects. For nearly 30 seconds, Margaret and Thomas remained motionless, their figures fixed in time by chemical reaction and light. Samuel believed he had captured something pure that day, a mother's love crystallized in silver and emulsion. The photograph was developed according to standard procedures of the era. Margaret came to collect it a week later, and when she saw the image, she wept. It was perfect, she said. It was exactly what she had hoped for, a permanent record of this precious moment with her son. For 90 years, the photograph remained in obscurity. It passed from Margaret's descendants to antique dealers, then to private collectors, each owner unaware of the peculiarity hidden within the frame. The image was simply filed away as a curiosity of the early 20th century, a well-composed portrait of a mother and child, nothing more. But in 1998, everything changed. A historian and photographer named Dr. Elizabeth Ashford was cataloging a collection of vintage photographs acquired from an estate sale in Boston. As she examined each image with a magnifying glass, cross-referencing them with historical records, she noticed the Mitchell portrait. At first, it seemed unremarkable, a technically competent photograph from the Edwardian period. But as she adjusted her magnifying glass, studying the details with the intensity of someone trained to observe minute variations in light and shadow, she saw something that made her breath catch. In Margaret's right hand, which cradled the infant's back, there was a reflection. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably present. Dr. Ashford moved the photograph to different angles, examined it under various light sources, and each time, the reflection remained. What appeared in that reflection was impossible. If you're enjoying the video so far, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. That helps me so much. And leave a comment about what you think of this story so far. In the reflection visible on Margaret's hand, there appeared to be a figure, not Margaret herself. That would have been explicable, a simple mirror reflection. No, the figure in the reflection was different. It was darker, more imposing, and its features seemed distorted in a way that didn't match any logical explanation of how light and shadow should behave on skin. Dr. Ashford contacted colleagues at the Rhode Island Historical Society. She submitted the photograph for analysis by contemporary imaging experts. What followed was a cascade of investigations, each one more puzzling than the last. The photograph was examined by specialists in photographic history, in optics, in paranormal phenomena. Theories proliferated. Some suggested it was a photographic artifact, a common occurrence with the plates of that era, where impurities or damage could create unexpected marks. Others proposed it was a double exposure, though examination of the original plate showed no evidence of multiple exposures. Still, others whispered about possibilities that defied rational explanation. But Dr. Ashford had discovered something else. In the historical records of Providence, she found Margaret Thornton's diary, and what it contained would deepen the mystery exponentially. Margaret's entries were sparse but revealing. She wrote about Thomas's birth, she wrote about her joy, but she also wrote about strange occurrences, about moments when she felt a presence in the room, about shadows that seemed to move independently, about the sensation of being watched while cradling her son. One entry dated 2 weeks before the photograph was particularly disturbing. I felt it again today, that weight, that shadow. It is always near Thomas. Samuel thinks I am mad, but I know what I feel. It protects him, or perhaps it claims him. I do not know which frightens me more. The photograph had been taken just days after that entry, and in that fraction of a second, when Samuel Mitchell's camera captured the light, something else had been captured as well. Something that shouldn't have been there. Something that Margaret, perhaps, had known was coming. To understand what that reflection meant, we must journey back to 1905, 3 years before the photograph was taken. Margaret Thornton had not always been the serene woman captured in Mitchell's studio. In her youth, she had been vibrant, ambitious, determined to escape the suffocating expectations placed upon women of her station. She had educated herself extensively, read voraciously, and harbored dreams of becoming a writer or scholar, professions deemed entirely unsuitable for her sex. But life, as it often does, had other plans. At 25, Margaret met and married Robert Thornton, a banker of respectable standing and considerable wealth. The marriage had been arranged, as was customary, but Margaret had convinced herself that affection would follow. Robert was not unkind. He was simply distant, absorbed in his business affairs, regarding his wife as one might regard a valuable piece of furniture, something to be maintained but not truly engaged with. For 7 years, Margaret lived in the Thornton mansion on Benefit Street, gradually suffocating beneath the weight of expectation and routine. She hosted dinner parties. She attended charity functions. She performed the role of dutiful wife with such precision that few would have guessed at the desperation underlying her compliance. Then came 1905 and the death of Margaret's younger sister, Catherine. Catherine had been only 19, vibrant and wild in ways Margaret had never permitted herself to be. She had danced with unsuitable men, read forbidden literature, laughed too loudly and cared too little for propriety. And then, suddenly she was gone, taken by pneumonia in the cold months of winter, her life extinguished before it had truly begun. Margaret attended the funeral in a state of shock. As Catherine's coffin was lowered into the frozen ground, Margaret felt something break inside her. It was as if the carefully constructed walls of her controlled existence had shattered, and something vast and desperate was trying to escape. That night, Margaret did something she had never done before. She walked into the woods behind the Thornton estate, alone, with no purpose except to feel the cold bite of the winter air and the sting of pine needles beneath her feet. The forest was dense and dark, the kind of place where the rules of civilized society seemed to have no jurisdiction. She didn't intend to wander as far as she did, but the forest seemed to draw her deeper, the path becoming less defined with each step. At some point she realized she was lost, but rather than feeling fear, she felt something else, a strange sense of release. As if by losing her way physically, she had also lost the constraints that had bound her spiritually. It was there, in that darkening forest, that she encountered something. She never described it clearly to anyone, not even in her diary. But in her later entries, she referred to it as the presence, the shadow, the thing that watches. Whatever it was, it changed something fundamental in her understanding of the world. After that night, Margaret returned to the mansion transformed. Not visibly, her behavior remained impeccable, her performance as the dutiful wife flawless. But internally, something had shifted. She felt observed, she felt claimed. Within weeks, she became pregnant. This seemed like a miracle. After 7 years of marriage, a child would finally seal her place in society, would finally give her life meaning and purpose. Robert was delighted. The household staff began preparations for an heir. Margaret carried the pregnancy with a strange mixture of joy and dread. But the pregnancy was difficult. Margaret experienced vivid nightmares. She woke gasping, certain that something had been standing over her bed. She felt constant sensations of being touched by invisible hands, not violently, but possessively. And she knew with an absolute certainty she couldn't explain that this pregnancy was not entirely natural. When Thomas was finally born, in the spring of 1908, Margaret looked at her infant son and saw something in his eyes, some flicker of awareness that seemed far too ancient for a newborn. She loved him desperately, would have died for him without hesitation. But she also feared him, feared what he might be, feared what had brought him into existence. It was to capture this complicated moment, this intersection of maternal love and existential dread, that Margaret had gone to Samuel Mitchell's studio on that autumn day. She had wanted proof, she had wanted evidence that what she felt was real, that she wasn't mad. She had hoped that the camera, that scientific instrument, might capture what only she could sense. And in a way, it had. The investigations into the photograph intensified throughout 1998 and into 1999. Dr. Elizabeth Ashford became obsessed with the image, driven by a conviction that beneath this mystery lay something profound about the nature of reality itself. She began researching Margaret Thornton's life with methodical precision. She interviewed descendants of the Thornton family, some of whom were reluctant to discuss their history. She combed through birth records, marriage certificates, medical documents from the period, and gradually, a picture emerged that was deeply unsettling. Thomas Thornton, Margaret's son, had lived a long and prosperous life. He became a respected businessman, married, had children, lived well into his 80s. By all conventional measures, he had been a normal, unremarkable man. And yet, those who had known him in life reported strange peculiarities. His wife, Emma, had kept a journal. In it, she described her husband as devoted but distant, present but apart, as if some essential part of him resided elsewhere. She wrote about his uncanny ability to know things he shouldn't have known, about dreams he claimed to have shared with distant relatives, about moments when his expression would change entirely, becoming something ancient and unfamiliar. Their children, Thomas's descendants, reported similar observations. They described their father as not quite right, watching, present in body but absent in spirit. One granddaughter, interviewed by Dr. Ashford in 1999, said something that made the researcher pause. "Grandfather was kind to us, always, but I felt like we were being studied, like he was trying to understand what it meant to be human by observing us." Dr. Ashford delved deeper into historical records, searching for any documentation of unusual occurrences associated with the Thornton family. What she found was ambiguous but suggestive. There were references in local newspapers to peculiar incidents. A fire that broke out near the Thornton house but inexplicably stopped before reaching it. An illness that swept through the neighborhood but never touched the Thornton children. A series of coincidences so remarkable they bordered on the miraculous. She also found Margaret's diary, which had been donated to the Rhode Island Historical Society by descendants. In it, Margaret described her experiences with poetic but haunting clarity. One particularly striking entry, written when Thomas was 2 years old, read, "He understands things he shouldn't. Yesterday he looked directly at me and said in a voice not quite his own, I did not mean to frighten you, Mother. I am learning to be. Ooh, what did he mean? How could a 2-year-old speak with such intention? And yet when Robert came into the room, Thomas was silent, playing with his toys like any normal child. Am I the only one who sees? Am I the only one who understands what he is? Dr. Ashford consulted with psychiatrists, paranormal researchers, and historians of the occult. The theories became increasingly speculative. Some suggested that Margaret had been experiencing a form of postpartum psychosis, that she had projected her anxieties onto her son, creating a narrative of supernatural strangeness. Others proposed that the reflection in the photograph was simply a photographic anomaly, and that Margaret's diary entries were the fantasies of a disturbed mind. But Dr. Ashford was not convinced. She had spent her career studying photography and its relationship to truth and perception. She knew how cameras captured reality and how easily they could be deceived. And looking at that reflection, she saw something that didn't conform to any ordinary photographic artifact or optical illusion. The reflection showed intention. It showed purpose. It showed something that appeared to be aware. Dr. Ashford began researching folklore and mythology, searching for historical parallels to Margaret's experience. She found numerous accounts across different cultures and time periods of women who had encounters with the other in forests or liminal spaces, and who subsequently bore children that seemed to exist between worlds. The children in these accounts were universally described as brilliant, perceptive, and fundamentally isolated by their nature. In Celtic mythology, there were stories of changelings and fairy-touched children. In Germanic folklore, tales of elves and spirits who fathered children with mortal women. In indigenous American traditions, stories of beings from other realms who occasionally took human form or fathered offspring. Were these all manifestations of the same phenomenon? Was Margaret's experience just one more instance of a pattern that stretched back through human history? Or were they simply the desperate attempts of disturbed minds to make sense of tragedy and loss? If this content is resonating with you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps me tremendously. Drop a comment telling me what you think is really happening in this story. By the year 2000, Dr. Ashford had assembled a comprehensive file on the Mitchell photograph and the Thornton family. She had interviewed experts from multiple disciplines, consulted with archivists and historians, and compiled her findings into a manuscript that was both rigorous in its research and unsettling in its implications. But it was during this research that she discovered something that would deepen the mystery even further. While examining microfilm of Providence newspapers from 1908, she found a small notice buried in the back pages. It was a police report, brief and cryptic, describing an incident at the home of Samuel Mitchell, the photographer. According to the report, Mitchell had suffered a nervous episode shortly after developing the Thornton photograph. He had destroyed most of his photographic plates, claiming that something was wrong with them. He had abandoned photography entirely and spent the remainder of his life as a recluse. More intriguingly, the report mentioned that Mitchell had consulted with a local clergyman about the matter. Dr. Ashford was able to locate the church records and found a brief notation by the priest. Mr. Mitchell presented me with a disturbing photograph. He claimed it captured something that should not be captured. I advised him to pray and to cease his speculation about matters beyond human understanding. I trust he will comply. The priest's name was Father Cornelius Walsh. Dr. Ashford discovered that Walsh had spent his entire priestly career in Providence, and that he had left behind a collection of personal papers, including journals, now housed in the archives of Brown University. What she found in those journals was extraordinary. Father Walsh had maintained meticulous records of what he considered to be supernatural or unusual occurrences within his parish. Among these records was a detailed entry about his meeting with Samuel Mitchell. Walsh had examined the photograph himself and had recorded his observations. The photograph is disturbing in ways I struggle to articulate. It appears to be a simple portrait, a mother and child, posed with the competence of a skilled photographer. And yet, there is an element present in the image that creates a profound sense of wrongness. In the mother's hand, I perceive what appears to be a reflection or shadow of a form that should not be there. Mr. Mitchell believes it is a supernatural phenomenon. I'm inclined to agree, though I cannot fathom its nature or purpose. Walsh went on to describe his research into the Thornton family and Margaret's experiences. He had apparently attempted to speak with Margaret herself, but reported that she had refused to discuss the matter, insisting that it was a private family concern. Most remarkably, Walsh had written, "I have come to believe that what occurred in that forest was neither demonic nor angelic, but something entirely other, something that operates according to principles we do not understand and cannot judge by our conventional moral frameworks. The child born of this union appears to be the point of intersection between two modes of being. Whether this is a blessing or a curse, I cannot determine. I leave the matter to God's judgment." Dr. Ashford found herself at an impasse. She had uncovered a wealth of circumstantial evidence suggesting that something genuinely unusual had occurred, something that had affected multiple observers across different time periods and disciplines. And yet, the evidence remained fundamentally ambiguous. It could be interpreted as genuine documentation of a supernatural or paranormal event, or it could be dismissed as the collective delusion of emotionally disturbed or superstitious individuals. The photograph itself remained the central mystery. Modern analysis had found no evidence of tampering or double exposure. The reflection was undeniably present in the original plate, and yet no laboratory analysis could explain how the reflection had formed or what it represented. Dr. Ashford decided to present her findings to the academic community. In 2001, she published a paper titled "Photographic Anomalies and Historical Documentation: The Mitchell Portrait of 1908. The paper was received with mixed reactions. Some colleagues praised her meticulous research and thoughtful analysis. Others dismissed it as pseudoscientific speculation, an attempt to find evidence of the paranormal where none existed. But the paper attracted attention beyond academic circles. Paranormal researchers contacted Dr. Ashford. Enthusiasts of the mysterious began requesting copies of the photograph. Online communities formed dedicated to discussing its implications. The image that had languished in obscurity for 90 years suddenly became the subject of intense scrutiny and fascination, and people began to ask questions that no one could adequately answer. What was the reflection in the photograph? What had Margaret encountered in that forest? And what exactly was the nature of the presence she had sensed in her son? Decades have passed since Dr. Elizabeth Ashford's initial discovery of the Mitchell photograph. The image has become the subject of countless documentaries, articles, and internet discussions. Theories continue to proliferate. Technology has advanced, allowing for increasingly detailed analysis of the original photographic plate. And yet, the fundamental mystery remains unresolved. Some observers have proposed rational explanations. Perhaps Margaret suffered from a previously undiagnosed mental illness. Perhaps the reflection is a result of unusual chemical reactions during the developing process. Perhaps the entire narrative constructed around the photograph is an elaborate fiction, a story we have collectively invented to make sense of an ambiguous image. Others maintain that something genuinely inexplicable occurred. They point to the consistency of the accounts across different sources and time periods. They argue that the reflection represents something beyond our current scientific understanding, something that challenges our assumptions about the nature of reality and consciousness. But perhaps the most unsettling possibility is that the truth lies somewhere between these two extremes. Perhaps Margaret did experience something real, but something that exists outside the framework of categories like supernatural or paranormal. Perhaps there are modes of being, dimensions of existence, that occasionally intersect with our own. Perhaps the reflection in the photograph captures one such intersection, a moment when something from another realm of existence manifested itself briefly in our world. Thomas Thornton lived a full life. He was known as a successful businessman, a devoted family man, and a respected member of his community. Those who knew him described him as peculiar but ultimately human. Nothing in the documented record suggests that he was anything other than a normal man living a normal life. And yet those closest to him reported that same sense of otherness, that feeling of being studied, that perception of an awareness that seemed to extend beyond the boundaries of ordinary consciousness. Margaret herself lived to the age of 76. She never publicly discussed her experience. She never acknowledged the strangeness that those around her seemed to perceive. In her diary, her entries became less frequent as she aged. The final entry, written in 1935, was brief and enigmatic. "I understand now. He is not here to harm us. He is here to learn. What he becomes will depend not on what he is, but on what we teach him to be." Perhaps that is all any of us are, reflections of those who shaped us, shadows of what we might have been. The photograph itself remains preserved in a climate-controlled archive. It is examined occasionally by researchers, analyzed with increasingly sophisticated technology, but no definitive explanation has ever been established for the reflection captured within it. The original photographic plate still exists, still shows the same inexplicable shadow on Margaret's hand, so we are left with questions. What was the presence that Margaret encountered in that forest? What force brought Thomas Thornton into existence, and what does the reflection in that 1908 photograph actually represent? Perhaps it is a manifestation of something genuinely supernatural, a being from another realm, an entity that operates according to rules we do not understand. Perhaps it is a psychological phenomenon, a projection of Margaret's disturbed mind made visible through the strange alchemy of early photographic processes. Perhaps it is something else entirely, something that doesn't fit into any existing category of explanation. Or perhaps the most unsettling answer is the simplest. Perhaps it is exactly what it appears to be, a reflection of something that was truly there, something that defies explanation precisely because our current frameworks of understanding are inadequate to comprehend it. Margaret Thornton looked at her son and saw something she could not name. She carried him to a photographer and allowed that moment to be captured for posterity. In that fraction of a second, as light struck a photographic plate, something that should not have been there appeared. And more than a century later, we are still trying to understand what that something was. The photograph remains. The questions remain. And in the reflection captured on Margaret's hand, something continues to watch us. Its nature as mysterious and unknowable as it was on that autumn day in 1908. If you loved this video, leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and answer any questions you have. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next mysteries.